You'll see these wooden fences, and you'll see the concrete. These wooden fences are called sacrificed fencing. During the Civil War, a lot of people, or the Confederacy, needed metal. So a lot of people would take their cast iron or wrought iron gates, and they would melt them down for bullets and cannonballs, with the promise that when the war was over, they would get their wrought iron gating back, or their cast iron gates. Well, as you can see, that didn't happen. So you see what's called sacrificed fencing. And today it's more of a badge of honor that you have it. And as you can see, this home, another badge of honor in Charleston. This is called stucco over brick. And the brick walls the bricks came from local plantations made by hand by mostly the children of the enslaved. Most of it coming from Boone Hall Plantation over in Mount Pleasant. And then to make the houses look a little bit fancier, they would put this stucco over the brick, and then they would score it to make it look like stone. So they're tricking you. Little tricksters. Yeah, just a nice... Now that was the General Beauregard's headquarters during the Civil War. You see, now it didn't have those two Victorian additions, those rounded Victorian additions on the front when General Beauregard was here during the Civil War. Those were added later, and tour guides like to joke around and call it the Dolly Parton House for obvious reasons. This is the house that went up for sale in the summertime, and they were asking $4 million for it. Don't know if they've dropped it, but it's got one of the nicest piazzas in the city. We're coming up to Water Street. Now, the last royal governor of South Carolina lived in this house, and this was on water. Water Street was underwater. So he literally had a little boat. And when he decided to escape Charleston during the Revolution, he got on his little dinghy and escaped Charleston, but left his wife here to face the Americans by herself. What a great husband. But I don't want to make too much noise. This is a residential area. They don't like people in the residential area after 5 unless they have a reason to be in the residential area. Well, I mean, if you pay millions of dollars for a house, I guess those are the conditions you can have. Now over here we have the Nathaniel Russell house. Nathaniel Russell was from Rhode Island, and he made his fortune in dealing in slavery. Yes, the North had slaves. The North profited off slavery by transporting enslaved people from Africa to America, and that's how Nathaniel Russell made his fortune. When this house was constructed, it was one of the nicest houses in Charleston. There's a little wrought iron gate that has NR, Nathaniel Russell's initials, in them. And today it's a museum. So you can come and tour that. I mean, the thing about Charleston is you can't walk by a single house without having a major piece of history involving that house, or even a church. This is the Scottish Presbyterian Church. They were known for many years as the Silent Church because when the Civil War started, they donated their church bells to the cause. Again, melting down that metal. And they decided after the war not to replace those bells for almost a century. And that was to honor their dead who had fallen during the Civil War, that they chose not to replace the bells until recently. The Scottish people here, the First Presbyterian Church, the congregation goes back to 1731. They also brought with them the game of golf. And so the first golf course in America, 9 holes of golf, here in Charleston in Charleston Village. We are on Trad Street. Trad is the most historic block in the city. I know I keep saying that, I keep repeating myself, but it's literally the back lot of the Patriot. But I'm not going up Trad. The house over here used to be a stable. And the way that you can tell that a house was used as a stable is, one, look at those windows. See how small they are? Just enough room for a horse's head maybe to come out. And then look at that door. That rounded archway. Just big enough for a horse and a carriage to come through. And this is a home of one of the judges during the civil rights era. Very interesting story about him. I'll cover him more in depth in another video. But this is just me walking through my city. A nightly walk. During the day, you can find the descendants of the Gullah Geechee people. They sit on the street and they make sweetgrass baskets. And you'll find that the way that they coil them together, the same way that they're coiled together in regions of West Africa. This house here, going back to the Patriot, this was Aunt Charlotte's house in the Patriot. They painted it a different color because they don't like people looking at their house. South Carolina Society building. Cotillions, debutantes, boys becoming young, learning how to become young gentlemen, girls learning how to become young ladies. And we are approaching St. Michael's. The St. Michael's Church is the church that pretty much, if you're anybody who is anybody, this is the church in Charleston that you came to. Now, we are approaching what's called the four corners of law. So you have federal law, federal law, state law, municipal law, and God's law, all on the four corners here. And so Ripley, of Ripley's Believe It or Not, was dating a woman from Charleston, and he coined this corner the four corners of law. What would they say? Mail, jail, bail, and hell. Now this is where signers of the Constitution are buried. John Rutledge, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, all were signers of the U.S. Constitution. So that's the old, I think that's the old post office, St. Michael's. Pew 43, Princess Diana, Prince Charles, now King Charles, General Robert E. Lee, George Washington. Just a few of the people that have sat in that pew. Now I'm on Broad Street. Of course, St. Michael's, their church bells have gone across the Atlantic several times. The first time they went back to England was after the Revolutionary War. The British had taken charge of Charleston and occupied it in 1780 and sent the bells back to England. England eventually sent them back, and then I think during the Civil War they were shipped across for safekeeping. And again, it's something I'd have to cover in another video. A few decades ago they were cracked. They sent it back to England. They repaired the bells, sent them back. But like I said, I'll get more into detail about that in another video. This is just a general video of me walking around showing you my city. And, topics that will be covered in depth in other videos are just being scratched on the surface. And this is only a few blocks here in Charleston. This is not the entire city. So I have material for days just in this few blocks, let alone the entire city. City that saw protests during the civil rights. Septima Clark. MLK was here. Lots of history. The good, the bad, the ugly. It was all here. In fact, the election of 1860, a riot broke out on this very street. There's a guy wearing a banana on his head. The darndest things you see in Charleston. But back over at St. Michael's, during the riot after the election of 1860, there was a gentleman who was just standing outside the church who was shot. This is what I wanted to really talk about. This is the Hat Man. And he goes back to just after the Civil War. Around the time of the Civil War, there was a haberdashery here. Every part of his body is a hat. They say that his ears, one is a Confederate hat, one is a Union hat. His eyes, his nose, his mouth, his feet, his shoes, everything's hats. But as you can see, he looks very scary. And the Hat Man cannot be taken down or removed. And when they were refurbishing this building, restuccoing it, they uncovered the Hat Man under a layer of stucco. And remember, the Board of Architectural Review that I mentioned, anything over 75 years old cannot be altered unless by the hand of God or nature. So, because Hat Man is over 75 years old, here he is. And the legend of Hat Man. You see, here in the South, people like to make sure their kids mind their manners, get good grades. And if not, they say that Hat Man will come, kill himself off the wall, and will come and get you and drag you down into the sewers. That's just a legend. But I know people who will not walk on this side of Church Street because they avoid the Hat Man. And yes, Caleb, you do taste good with ketchup. Inside joke between me and my little buddy. And down the street we have the Customs and Exchange Building. This is where commerce was conducted. I'm not going to walk down there, but I will show you. I don't know if you can see it. But yeah, that's where you go pay your taxes. Patriots from the American Revolution were held as prisoners in that building. George Washington was entertained for 3 days at a ball on the second floor. In that very room, the U.S. Constitution was ratified. It's one of only 3 buildings in the country you can visit where the Constitution was actually ratified. And the Declaration of Independence was read to the people in 1776 for the first time from the balcony of that building by President John Rutledge. Now, he was president, also called dictator of South Carolina, and dictator not in a negative sense. That was just what they called their leader before they settled on governor. But he would have been the first governor after the royal governors. He would have been the first American governor of South Carolina, along with his little brother later on, Edward Rutledge, who was the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence. Well, Charleston was founded 1680. King Charles II, he gave the Carolinas to his 8 best friends, known as the Lords Proprietor. The most well-known of the Lords Proprietor would be Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper. We have the Ashley River and the Cooper River named for him. And a compliment from King Charles II was that Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper is the greatest whoremaster of London. This is the Dock Street Theatre. It's been here since the founding of the colony. We have the Huguenot Church. It's the French Protestants. You see, when we were founded under religious liberty, the most religious liberty you could have at the time. The ABCs of the 18th century, 17th century. Anybody but Catholic could come here and worship here. The only thing is you could not call your church a church. You called it a meeting house because we had an official religion, the Church of England. The ABCs, anybody but Catholic. Our competition in colonizing North America was France and Spain. They were both Catholic countries. So naturally, if you came to an English colony, you were a spy for France or for Spain.